want to close more deals, maybe achieve a bit more entrepreneurial success. What if I told you there were like 7 key advantages you could leverage in pretty much every negotiation, almost like a secret playbook?
A playbook. I like that.
Welcome to the deep dive. We take the essential knowledge from key sources and for advantage, and we boil it down so you, our listener, can get the crucial info fast.
Right. And our mission today.
Our mission today is to pull out 7 core negotiation advantages you can start using, well, maybe even today. Think of it as, going from maybe feeling a bit uncertain to being a pretty savvy negotiator all in one go.
Exactly. We're not just summarizing here, we're synthesizing.
Yeah.
We've taken those core ideas of what's called information-based bargaining, basically. The idea that planning, listening, and adapting are your absolute best tools. And we've translated them into, well, actionable advantages for your entrepreneurial journey.
Okay, so buckle up. Over our time together, we're going to explore these 7 specific areas that can give you a real edge. First, unlocking your authentic bargaining style. Second, setting the stage with clear goals and expectations. Third, the power of building and leveraging relationships. That's a big one.
Crucial.
Fourth, identifying and utilizing your negotiation leverage. Fifth, navigating with authoritative standards and norms. Sixth, deeply understanding the other party's interests, getting inside their head, maybe.
Well, understanding their why.
Right. And seventh, harnessing the process of information-based bargaining itself. I'm genuinely excited to unpack these and hear how you listening can start putting them to work. So let's dive into that first one, unlocking your authentic bargaining style. It's kind of like figuring out your negotiation superpower, isn't it?
It really is. Think about it like watching a great athlete. They know their strengths, their weaknesses inside out. Understanding your personal negotiation style, it's that same kind of, fundamental self-awareness. It gives you clarity on your natural inclinations, how you probably come across to others. And that lets you be more comfortable, more authentic, and frankly, more persuasive because you're not trying to be someone you're not.
So it's not about putting on an act, like some kind of negotiation persona.
No, not at all. Actually, the opposite. When you understand your style, are you naturally collaborative, maybe more competitive? Or do you tend to accommodate others easily? You can prepare more strategically. You start to see, okay, here's where my style is a plus, and here are the potential weak spots I need to think about.
Right.
Plus, that self-awareness just makes you way more adaptable when you inevitably face different personalities across the table.
What if someone just, wings it, goes into negotiations without really thinking about their own style? What are the potential pitfalls there?
Well, they might try to adopt tactics that feel forced, unnatural. And that often comes across as awkward, right? It can undermine their credibility. Or they could just miss chances to leverage their actual strengths. Imagine someone who's naturally a great creative problem solver trying to act super aggressive. It probably won't feel right, and it might just shut down opportunities for finding those clever solutions.
I can see that.
Or they might just give away too much, make concessions that don't serve their interests simply because it aligns with some unexamined part of their default style.
And I imagine negotiating when you're feeling completely out of your depth or unnatural must just add a whole layer of unnecessary stress.
Oh, absolutely. That anxiety, it clouds your judgment, makes it so much harder to think clearly, strategically, especially when the pressure's on. Now, we do see some really smart companies here in the U.S. actively helping their teams get a handle on this.
Okay, give us some real-world examples. How does that look in practice?
Well, think about sales training programs. Lots of companies use these to help their teams spot different client negotiation styles. Like, is this client looking for a partnership, or are they purely focused on the bottom line, the price? And then they learn how to tailor their own approach. It's about, recognizing the dance you're in. You also see it in team-based negotiations. Smart companies will put together teams with diverse personalities, ensuring they've got a range of approaches covered. Like a real estate development team might have someone great at building rapport with landowners, another person who's just laser focused on the numbers, the analysis, and maybe a decisive closer who can, seal the deal.
So it's about having that well-rounded capability within the team.
Precisely. And then there are things like self-assessment tools. Some places use personality assessments, feedback mechanisms, anything to help employees understand their own tendencies and how to best use them. Workshops where people actually reflect on past negotiations. What did I do? How did it land? That can be incredibly insightful.
Okay, so on the flip side, what are some common mistakes you see from companies, maybe competitors, that completely ignore this whole aspect of understanding negotiation styles?
Oh, a big one is the one-size-fits-all approach. They have these rigid tactics they try to apply to every situation, regardless of who's on the other side. So a competitor with a really aggressive, hard-nosed style might completely alienate potential partners who actually value collaboration and relationships more.
Right, pushes them away.
Exactly. Another common issue is just ignoring personality clashes, either within their own team or with the other side. If you've got, say, two super competitive people locked in a negotiation and neither knows how to adapt or even understand the other's style, they might just end up in this pointless power struggle that goes absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for just wasted time and a lot of frustration.
Totally. And then there's just a plain lack of adaptability. Companies that don't train their people to recognize and adjust to different styles, they miss out. They miss chances to build rapport, find creative solutions that actually work for everyone. Think of a sales team that's only ever focused on pushing the lowest price they might lose, deals to competitors who offer more, like personalized service or strong relationships or solutions tailored to the client's bigger needs, not just the price tag.
Okay, so for you, our listener, the entrepreneur who wants to, level up their negotiation game, how can they start using this principle, understanding their authentic style, like right now?
It really starts with some honest self-reflection.
Mm.
Seriously, take some time. Think about your natural tendencies when you're in a negotiation. Do you instinctively try to find common ground, work together? Or do you feel more comfortable really advocating strongly for your position? Maybe you tend to prioritize keeping things harmonious, accommodating the other person. Once you have a clearer picture of your, let's say, dominant style, acknowledge its strengths, because every style has strengths. But also, be really aware of the potential blind spots. For instance, if you know you're very competitive, you might need to consciously practice active listening. Focus more on building that rapport.
Right.
If you tend to be more accommodating, maybe you need to work on practicing being more assertive about your own needs and boundaries. It's really about expanding your flexibility, your toolkit, so you can connect better with more people and ultimately achieve your goals.
That's really practical. Okay, let's shift gears to our second key advantage. This one feels like it lays the groundwork for pretty much everything else. Setting the stage with clear goals and expectations. It's like knowing your destination before you start the journey, right?
Absolutely fundamental. As the book Bargaining for Advantage points out, there's a strong correlation. Those who expect more often tend to achieve more. Having crystal clear goals defined before you even think about sitting down at the table. It's crucial.
Why is that clarity so vital? What does it actually do for you?
Well, think of clear goals as your compass in the negotiation. They give you a roadmap. They help you prioritize what's really important versus what's maybe nice to have. They guide your decisions on, which concessions you can afford to make and which ones are absolute deal breakers. They also give you a significant confidence boost. When you know what you're aiming for and you genuinely believe it's achievable, that conviction comes across. It makes you more assertive. And finally, well-defined goals give you a benchmark. How do you know if you succeeded? You measure against those goals. It allows for objective assessment.
Conversely, what are the dangers of just sort of wandering into a negotiation without that clear sense of purpose?
Oh, the risks are huge. You can find the negotiation just drifting aimlessly, wasting everyone's time. And you might end up with a result that's far from ideal, simply because you didn't have a clear direction. You might also settle for much less than you actually need or deserve, just because you lack that defined benchmark.
Right. You don't know what good looks like.
Exactly. And it becomes incredibly difficult to evaluate any offers the other side makes if you haven't first figured out your own clear expectations.
It sounds like you're basically setting yourself up to just react to whatever they throw at you, instead of actually driving the conversation towards your objectives.
Precisely. You're on the back foot from the start. Yeah. Now let's look at how successful companies, in the U.S. really make this principle work for them.
Yeah, give us some specific examples of that in action. How do they nail down these goals?
Okay, a very common and effective practice is using the SMART framework to define target outcomes. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So a software company negotiating a big license deal, they won't just say they want a good deal. No, they'll have specific targets for revenue, for the duration of the agreement, the exact usage terms allowed, maybe even timelines for implementation.
Very concrete.
Very concrete. Another absolutely critical strategy is conducting a thorough BATNA analysis. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Companies that are really prepared rigorously assess their alternatives outside of this specific negotiation. What happens if this deal falls through?
Right.
This helps them understand their absolute walkaway point, the point where they're genuinely better off saying no thanks. A manufacturing firm, for instance, before locking in a long-term contract with a key supplier, will definitely research and evaluate alternative suppliers. That's their BATNA.
That BATNA, it's basically your leverage if this particular deal doesn't pan out, your plan B.
Precisely. Your plan B gives you power in negotiating plan A. And then there's scenario planning. Savvy companies don't just have one goal in mind. They develop various potential negotiation scenarios, like what if they offer X? What if they push back on Y? And for each scenario, they'll have corresponding target outcomes and acceptable ranges. This proactive thinking lets them be much more adaptable during the negotiation itself, while still keeping their main objectives front and center.
So flipping it again, what are some typical mistakes you see competitors making when they just don't prioritize setting these clear goals up front?
Oh, a frequent one is having really vague or poorly defined objectives. They go in with just a general idea, maybe get more market share or reduce costs, but without the specifics. This makes it super easy to get sidetracked on less important stuff, or worse, accept deals that don't actually align with their long-term strategy. Think of a startup jumping into a partnership without clear expectations on who provides what resources that can lead to big problems down the road.
Yeah, misunderstandings waiting to happen.
Totally. Another common pitfall is failing to really identify and understand their alternatives, their BTNA. If you don't know your walkaway point, you can feel pressured, desperate even, and end up making bad deals because you feel like you have no other choice. A company needing cash urgently might accept terrible loan terms if they haven't bothered to explore other potential lenders first.
Yeah, that feeling of being backed into a corner that can't lead to good long-term outcomes.
It rarely does. And then there's just reactive bargaining. Without clear goals, without that scenario planning we talked about, companies can be easily caught off guard. An unexpected proposal comes in, and they make impulsive decisions that might feel okay in the moment but don't actually serve their bigger interests. Like a retailer who hasn't planned for a competitor's sudden discounting might react with these unsustainable price cuts that just destroy their own profitability.
Okay, so bringing it back to you, our listener, how can you start implementing this principle? Setting clear goals and expectations in your own negotiations, starting now.
The absolute key takeaway is invest the time up front. Before you even start talking to the other side, clearly define your negotiation objectives. Be specific. Use SMART if it helps. Set ambitious but also realistic goals. What's your ideal outcome? What's your minimum acceptable outcome? And crucially, thoroughly understand your BATNA. What is your best alternative if you walk away from this deal? Doing that homework provides such a strong foundation. It guides all your decision-making throughout the whole process.
Solid, actionable advice. Okay, let's move on to our third key advantage. The power of building and leveraging relationships. We've all heard that phrase, business is about relationships. How does that really play out in successful negotiation?
That was absolutely fundamental. Bargaining for advantage really emphasizes this. Negotiations at their core are a form of communication, right? And strong, well-nurtured relationships are basically the bedrock upon which effective communication and, importantly, cooperation are built.
Makes sense. So what are the specific, tangible benefits of actually investing in those strong relationships when you're negotiating?
Well, there are several key ones. Firstly, strong relationships foster increased trust and transparency. When you have that established rapport, there's just a greater likelihood of open, honest information sharing. That's vital if you want to truly understand each other's underlying needs and interests, not just the surface demands. Secondly, the enhanced collaboration. When there's a foundation of trust and mutual respect, you're much more likely to work together creatively, to find solutions that maybe weren't obvious at first, solutions that benefit both sides.
The win-win.
Exactly, finding that win-win space. And thirdly, it's about cultivating long-term value. Strong relationships often extend way beyond just one single transaction. They pave the way for future collaborations, sustainable partnerships, mutual growth. It's an investment.
So what are the potential downsides then? If you neglect relationship building, maybe you're too focused on just the deal itself.
You're likely to encounter increased mistrust, suspicion. That makes it significantly harder to reach agreements in the first place, obviously. Negotiations can become purely transactional, just haggling over price, immediate terms, with very little effort to understand the other person's perspective or find those mutually beneficial outcomes.
Feels very zero-sum.
It can feel very zero-sum. And of course, negative or purely transactional interactions can really damage future opportunities. You might win this battle, but lose the war, so to speak. It can even harm your reputation in the wider market.
That makes perfect sense. So how do we see successful companies in the U.S. actively using relationships in their negotiation strategies? What does that look like?
While many invest quite significantly in dedicated relationship management programs, especially with their key clients, crucial suppliers, strategic partners, they'll often have account managers whose primary job is simply to nurture those relationships, regular communication, proactively understanding their needs as they evolve, building those personal connections. Think about how major airlines manage their big corporate travel clients. It's all about the relationship.
Dedicated point person.
Right. Another common strategy is a really strong and consistent focus on creating mutual benefit. Companies that genuinely prioritize developing win-win scenarios and actively show they're committed to the other party's success too. They tend to build much stronger, more enduring partnerships, like a software vendor that goes the extra mile with customized support and training to make sure their client actually achieves the business goals they bought the software for. That builds immense goodwill.
Builds loyalty.
Absolutely. And then there's the seemingly simple but incredibly effective act of just networking and active engagement, participating in industry events, attending conferences, genuinely building those personal connections. Those can prove absolutely invaluable when a future negotiation comes up.
So it really is about looking beyond the immediate deal, thinking about the bigger picture, the longer term.
Precisely. It's playing the long game. Now, what about the mistakes? What common errors do you see competitors making when they essentially ignore this relational aspect of negotiation? A huge mistake is taking that purely transactional, short-sighted approach, focusing only on extracting the absolute best price or terms right now, with zero thought to the long-term impact on the relationship. Like a supplier who's constantly pushing for higher prices every chance they get without any regard for the buyer's own challenges or needs, eventually, they might just find themselves replaced by a competitor who offers more of a partnership.
Yeah, burns the bridge.
Burns the bridge. Poor communication and just a lack of follow-through are also major relationship killers. If a company frequently misses deadlines or doesn't respond promptly or fails to honor commitments they made, trust erodes incredibly quickly. And finally, sometimes companies employ aggressive or even exploitative tactics to try and gain a short-term win. That can severely damage relationships and lead to significant long-term reputational harm that far, far outweighs any immediate gain. Think misrepresenting a product just to close a deal.
All right, that'll catch up to you. Okay, so for you, our listener, the entrepreneur, who wants to build stronger negotiating relationships, what are the key takeaways here?
The core principle is simple but crucial. Genuinely invest in building those relationships. Focus on truly understanding your counterpart's needs, their perspectives, their priorities. Always be looking for ways to find mutually beneficial outcomes that create value for both sides, not just in this deal, but potentially down the road too. And always, always remember, negotiation is very often a repeated interaction, especially in business. Nurturing those relationships consistently pays huge dividends over time.
Excellent insights. Okay, let's dive into our fourth key advantage, identifying and utilizing your negotiation leverage. This feels like it's really about understanding where your power actually lies in the negotiation dynamic.
That's exactly it. Leverage, in its simplest form in negotiation, is basically the power you have to influence the other party, to nudge them towards your interests. It's about understanding, okay, what do I have that they want or need? Or, equally important, what alternatives do I have that maybe they don't?
What are the tangible benefits, then, of being really acutely aware of your leverage and knowing how to use it effectively?
Well, when you have that clear understanding, you can negotiate from a position of much greater strength and confidence. And that often translates directly into achieving more favorable terms, better outcomes for you.
Yeah.
It also empowers you to make firm, well-supported demands without feeling like you're just, asking for too much or overreaching.
Right, it backs up your ask.
Exactly. And strategically, it helps you make much more informed decisions about concessions. You understand which points you can afford to give on and which ones are absolutely critical for you to hold on to because they relate directly to your leverage.
Conversely, what are the potential downsides if you're just not aware of your leverage? Or maybe you are aware, but you fail to actually use it effectively?
You run a very real risk of undermining your own position. You might make unnecessary concessions, give away things you didn't need to, or accept terms that aren't really in your best interest simply because you didn't recognize the power you actually held. You might also inadvertently project an image of weakness or uncertainty, which can, frankly, encourage the other party to try and exploit that perceived vulnerability.
Yeah, makes you look like an easy target.
It can. And fundamentally, you'll just miss out on significant opportunities to gain a real advantage in the negotiation process. You're leaving value on the table.
So, how do successful companies in the U.S. systematically go about identifying and then effectively using their negotiation leverage? What are the strategies?
Okay, one really common and powerful strategy is clearly highlighting their unique value propositions. They emphasize what makes them different, better, essential. Things like proprietary technology, maybe a really strong brand recognition that the other party wants to associate with, significant market share, or specialized expertise that's hard to find elsewhere. Think of a pharmaceutical company that holds the patent on a breakthrough drug. The patent is massive leverage in pricing talks with healthcare providers.
Huge leverage.
Huge. Another crucial aspect, which we keep coming back to because it's so important, is building strong and credible alternatives, your BATNA. Having genuinely viable alternatives significantly reduces your dependence on this specific negotiation and therefore substantially increases your leverage. A large retail chain, for example, that has established solid relationships with multiple potential suppliers. They have far more leverage when negotiating terms with any single vendor.
They can walk away more easily.
Exactly. Their walkaway is credible. And finally, sometimes companies strategically form alliances or partnerships. They team up to create collective leverage, maybe by increasing their combined market influence or gaining access to unique resources together or expanding their distribution networks in a way they couldn't alone.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's really about recognizing your unique assets and always having viable backup plans.
Precisely. Those are two huge pillars of leverage. Now, what about the mistakes? What common errors do you observe competitors making when it comes to understanding and using their leverage? One very frequent mistake is focusing almost exclusively on price. Price, price, price. If that's your only point of negotiation, you're very easily undercut by others, and your leverage just diminishes significantly. Think of a manufacturer making a generic product with very little brand differentiation. They have very limited leverage to command premium pricing.
Commoditized.
Exactly. They become a commodity. Another common issue is just failing to recognize and articulate their own inherent strengths, their unique value. Companies sometimes undervalue what they bring to the table, and therefore they don't leverage those advantages effectively. A small tech startup, for instance, with a truly innovative piece of technology might not fully grasp its potential market value during acquisition talks and end up settling for way less than they could have.
Ouch.
Yeah. And finally becoming overly dependent on a single customer or a single supplier or a single partner that can drastically erode your leverage over time.
What?
A manufacturer that sources all of its critical components from only one supplier. They become extremely vulnerable in any negotiation with that supplier down the line.
You're trapped.
Pretty much. So for you, our listener, the entrepreneur navigating these sometimes tricky power dynamics in negotiation, what's the real key to harnessing leverage effectively? The first critical step is always to clearly identify all your potential sources of power in any given negotiation. What unique value do you offer? What's your current market position? What are your existing relationships like? Can they help? And crucially, what are your best alternatives, your BATNA? At the same time, you need to be actively trying to understand the other party's dependencies. What do they need from you? What are their alternatives? By thoroughly understanding both sides of this power equation, you can then strategically use your leverage to move towards your objectives while still aiming for an agreement that ideally works for both parties.
That's a really insightful way to frame it, understanding both sides of the leverage equation. Okay, let's move on to our fifth key advantage. Navigating with authoritative standards and norms. This sounds like bringing in objective external benchmarks to kind of strengthen your position, make it seem more legitimate.
That's exactly right. It's about strategically using things like established industry best practices, relevant legal precedents, prevailing market rates, research data, even widely accepted principles of fairness to provide objective support for your arguments and proposals. It's moving beyond, I want this to, this is fair because...
What are the key benefits of using this approach? Why bring in these external standards?
Well, first and foremost, it gives you an objective, often hard to refute justification for your proposals. This makes them significantly more persuasive than just stating your own opinion or desire. Second, by appealing to established and recognized norms, things everyone in the industry kind of accepts that you frame your position as reasonable, as legitimate, as within the bounds of what's generally done, that greatly increases the likelihood the other party will accept it, or at least see it as a valid starting point.
Makes it harder for them to just dismiss it out of hand.
Exactly. And third, it can actually help to de-escalate potential conflict. By shifting the focus away from subjective viewpoints, I feel this is right, towards mutually agreed upon external criteria, the market data shows this, you take some of the emotion out of it.
What are the potential downsides or risks if you don't leverage these external standards, if you just rely on your own arguments?
Negotiations can easily become very subjective and emotionally charged. You get bogged down in personal opinions, entrenched positions, rather than looking at objective facts. That can quickly lead to impasses, unproductive arguments.
Hmm.
It also becomes much harder to effectively justify your own proposals and equally hard to counter the other party's arguments if you don't have any external benchmarks or data to point to.
Just becomes a he said, she said situation.
Pretty much. And there's also a significantly increased risk of unknowingly agreeing to terms that are way below industry standards or maybe even legally unsound simply because you weren't aware of the relevant norms or regulations.
Okay, so how do we see successful companies in the US effectively using these authoritative standards and norms in their real-world negotiations?
A very common practice is rigorous industry benchmarking. Companies frequently use industry reports, market research data, competitor analysis, all sorts of things to establish what are considered fair and reasonable pricing structures, contract terms, performance metrics within their specific sector. For example, a company negotiating a supply agreement for raw materials might pull up recent reports on average commodity prices as a basis for their offer.
Using data.
Using data. Another absolutely critical area is ensuring full legal and regulatory compliance. Businesses, especially larger ones, are meticulous about making sure their negotiation practices and the final agreements comply with all applicable laws and regulations. And they often use these legal frameworks like labor laws, environmental regulations, whatever's relevant, as non-negotiable baseline standards in the negotiation itself.
The law is the law.
Right. And then there's the strategic use of independent third-party appraisals and valuations. This is particularly common in complex deals like mergers and acquisitions or real estate transactions. Relying on objective assessments from recognized neutral experts helps establish a fair and defensible price, taking some of the guesswork and argument out of it.
It adds that much-needed layer of objectivity, like you said, to what can sometimes be a very subjective and maybe emotionally driven process.
Precisely. It grounds the conversation in reality. Now, what about the mistakes? What common errors do you see competitors making when they fail to leverage these authoritative standards? One frequent mistake is just ignoring established industry standards altogether. They might make completely unrealistic demands or offers that are wildly out of line with what's generally accepted in the market. This makes them highly likely to be rejected outright, and it can seriously damage their credibility for future dealings. Like a startup asking for licensing fees that are 5 times higher than established competitors with similar tech, that's probably not going to fly.
Yeah, it looks amateurish or greedy.
Right. Another common pitfall is inadvertently or sometimes advertently violating legal or ethical standards in their push to get a deal done. This can lead to serious legal trouble, hefty financial penalties, and significant lasting reputational damage. Trying to enforce an illegal clause in a contract, for instance.
Big risk.
Huge risk. And finally, some competitors just over-rely on their own subjective opinions and internal valuations. They don't bother looking at external benchmarks. This can lead to them either undervaluing their own assets and leaving money on the table, or scaring away potential partners with completely unrealistic expectations based on, wishful thinking. Someone trying to sell their business based solely on their own super optimistic 5-year projections without getting a professional objective valuation. They risk either getting lowballed or deterring serious buyers altogether.
So for you, our listener, the entrepreneur looking to negotiate more effectively using these standards, how can you start putting this into practice?
The key first step, again, is homework. Do your research. Thoroughly identify the relevant industry standards, any legal precedents that might apply, market data, anything external and objective that supports your objectives in this specific negotiation. Then, strategically weave this information into your discussions. Use it to objectively justify your proposals. Frame your position not just as what you want, but as what is fair, reasonable, and grounded in these established external benchmarks.
That's really valuable advice. Okay, let's move now to our 6th key advantage. Deeply understanding the other party's interests. We touched on this a bit earlier, but it's so important it deserves its own focus. It's really about getting beyond what they're saying they want and understanding the why behind their demands, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's absolutely critical. It's about going beyond their stated positions.
Yeah.
Their specific demands or offers on the table to truly uncover their underlying needs, their motivations, their priorities, their concerns. These fundamental interests are often quite different from what they initially put forward.
What are the significant benefits of actually investing the time and effort to gain that deeper understanding? Why bother digging?
Oh, it unlocks a wealth of possibilities,
Yeah.
really. First, you can identify areas of common ground, shared interests, that you might never have recognized otherwise. This often leads to discovering creative, mutually beneficial, win-win solutions that satisfy both parties' core needs, not just their surface demands.
Finds the hidden overlap.
Exactly. Second, by truly understanding their underlying motivations, you can often find ways to create additional value in the negotiation. It expands the pie, moving beyond simply haggling over how to divide a fixed resource. Maybe they value predictability more than price or speed more than features. If you know that, you can tailor the deal.
Okay.
And finally, when you tailor your arguments, your proposals, even just your communication style to directly address their specific interests and concerns, your message just becomes significantly more compelling, more persuasive, ultimately more effective.
So what are the potential negative consequences if you don't take the time to really understand what's driving the other side? You just focus on their stated position.
You run a really significant risk of getting stuck in what's called positional bargaining. Both sides just dig in their heels on their initial demands without ever truly understanding the why behind those positions. It becomes a battle of wills.
Stalemate territory.
Often, yes. This can lead to loads of missed opportunities for reaching mutually beneficial agreements, simply because you haven't explored the underlying needs and priorities that could have unlocked creative solutions.
Yeah.
And even if you do manage to hammer out an agreement, it might be less stable, more prone to falling apart later or causing future disputes if it doesn't genuinely address the fundamental interests of both parties.
So how do successful companies in the U.S. actually go about systematically uncovering and understanding the other party's underlying interests? What are the techniques?
Well, they invest heavily in the art, and it is an art of active listening and strategic questioning. Their negotiators are rigorously trained not just to hear the words, but to truly listen attentively, to ask insightful, open-ended questions. Why is that important to you? Can you tell me more about their work? Questions that encourage the other party to elaborate on their needs and motivations, to probe beneath the surface. Sales teams, for example, are often taught specifically to focus on understanding the client's underlying business challenges, not just the features they ask for.
Going deeper.
Going deeper. Another crucial aspect is cultivating empathy and practicing perspective taking. Good companies encourage their negotiators to actively try to put themselves in the other party's shoes, to genuinely consider the negotiation from their viewpoint. This helps anticipate their potential needs, their concerns, their priorities, even their constraints.
Builds bridges.
It really does. And finally, as we've mentioned, they invest in thorough information gathering and due diligence, both before the negotiation starts and throughout the process. Researching the other party's business, their strategic priorities, their financial health, any potential pressures or constraints they might be under. All that context helps you understand their interests.
So it sounds like it's really a combination of careful preparation before and highly attuned interpersonal skills during the negotiation itself.
Absolutely. It's both prep and performance. Now, what about the mistakes? What common errors do you see competitors making when they fail to truly grasp the other side's interests? Oh, a very common and often costly mistake is just making assumptions. Assuming you know what the other party wants without actually taking the time to ask good questions and genuinely listen to their perspective. This leads to completely misaligned proposals, significant missed opportunities. For example, simply assuming a supplier only cares about price might blind you to their equally important need for, say, a long-term stable partnership or predictable order volumes.
Right, you offer the wrong thing.
Exactly. Another frequent issue is negotiators who just dominate the conversation. They talk way more than they listen. If you're constantly just presenting your own arguments, your own case, without giving the other party sufficient airtime to express their underlying needs and concerns, you are missing crucial information. It's like negotiating with earplugs in.
Yeah, monologue instead of dialogue.
Precisely. And finally, some competitors make the mistake of focusing almost exclusively on the monetary factors, price, discounts, payment terms, and completely overlooking important non-monetary interests. Things like the desire for a strong, collaborative working relationship, maybe potential future opportunities for partnership, even just reputational benefits or risk reduction. These can be incredibly powerful motivators, but you won't know unless you look for them.
So for you, our listener, the entrepreneur aiming to become a more effective, more insightful negotiator, how can you get better at understanding the other party's interests?
The key takeaway here is be intentional. Actively and consciously seek to understand those underlying interests, both before you start negotiating and throughout the entire process. Ask those open-ended questions that encourage explanation. Help me understand why X is so important. Listen attentively not just to the words, but the tone, the body language, what they don't say, and consciously try to see the situation from their perspective. By focusing on understanding their needs as deeply as you understand your own, you'll be far more likely to unlock those creative, successful outcomes for everyone involved.
That's invaluable advice, and it leads us perfectly into our seventh and final key advantage: harnessing the process of information-based bargaining. This really sounds like it's the overarching strategy, the philosophy almost, that ties everything else we've discussed together.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Information-based bargaining, as outlined in the source material, isn't just one tactic among many. It's the fundamental approach that underpins all successful negotiation. It's this continuous iterative cycle. Rigorous planning and preparation up front, active listening and skillful questioning to gather crucial information during the negotiation, and then being consistently willing and able to adapt your strategy based on the new insights you gain. Plan, listen, adapt, repeat.
What are the core benefits of consciously adopting this information-based approach? Why is it so powerful?
Firstly, it empowers you to make truly data-driven decisions, or at least information-driven decisions. Your strategic choices, what to offer, when to concede, when to hold firm, they're based on a thorough and evolving understanding of the actual situation, the other party's real interests, the overall dynamics at play, rather than just relying on gut feeling or, rigid preconceived notions.
More rational.
More rational, more grounded. Secondly, it gives you increased flexibility and agility. You're not locked into some rigid, predetermined plan that you follow no matter what. You're prepared, yes, but you're also ready to adjust your tactics, maybe even your overall strategy, as new and relevant information comes to light during the conversation.
Adaptability.
Crucial adaptability. And thirdly, by diligently gathering and carefully analyzing information, including those subtle signals throughout the process, you significantly improve your ability to anticipate the other party's likely moves, to predict potential outcomes with more accuracy, and ultimately, to achieve more predictable and favorable results for yourself.
Okay, so what are the potential downsides or negative consequences of not embracing this continuous information gathering and adaptation loop?
Well, you run the significant risk of just sticking rigidly to an inflexible strategy that simply doesn't account for new information, or changing circumstances, or how the other party is actually reacting. This inflexibility can quickly lead to impasses, stalemates, and lots of missed opportunities for finding common ground.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah, exactly. Tunnel vision. You might also completely fail to recognize important signals, verbal clues, nonverbal cues, maybe a subtle shift in their priorities, crucial pieces of information that could have led to breakthroughs or significantly better outcomes, simply because you weren't paying close enough attention or you weren't willing to adapt your approach based on what you were learning. And ultimately, without that flexible, informed, adaptive approach, the likelihood of the negotiation just stalling out or failing completely is substantially higher.
So how do we see successful companies in the U.S. effectively putting this information-based bargaining into practice? What does it look like on the ground?
Well, it starts, again, with heavy investment in thorough preparation and comprehensive due diligence before they even engage in serious talks. In-depth research on the other party's organization, their financials, the market conditions, maybe even their past negotiation behaviors if possible, potential alternative scenarios. The works. Think of a company meticulously analyzing a potential acquisition, targets financial statements, and interviewing former employees and understanding their market position. That's information-based prep.
Okay.
Then, during the negotiation itself, their skilled negotiators are trained to pay extremely close attention, not just to the explicit words, but also to the subtle nonverbal cues, body language, tone of voice, hesitation. They actively use that real-time information stream to refine their strategy and tactics as the discussion unfolds. Okay, they reacted strongly to that point. Let's explore why.
Reading the room.
Constantly reading the room. And finally, truly successful companies often conduct thorough post-negotiation analyses. They debrief. They objectively review what worked well, what didn't, maybe where they missed something. And they systematically capture those valuable learnings to ensure continuous improvement in future negotiations. It's a learning loop.
Right. It's that cycle of continuous learning and refinement, never stop improving.
Precisely. Now, what about the mistakes? What common errors do you observe competitors making when they don't fully embrace this information-based philosophy? Well, the most common mistake, honestly, is just insufficient preparation. Going into negotiations without having done the homework. They don't fully understand the other party's needs. They haven't really thought through their own alternatives. Their BT&A is fuzzy. And as a result, they're often at a significant disadvantage from the get-go, much more likely to make regrettable concessions.
Flying blind.
Flying blind, exactly. Another significant issue is being unwilling or just unable to actively listen and process information and feedback during the negotiation itself. Being rigid, sticking to your guns no matter what, being unwilling to adjust your approach based on new information or the other party's legitimate concerns, that just creates unnecessary conflict and hinders progress towards a deal.
Stubbornness.
Can look like stubbornness, yeah. And finally, failing to learn from past negotiation experiences. Not taking the time to analyze previous outcomes, good or bad. This means they miss valuable opportunities to refine their strategies, their tactics, their approach over time. They end up repeating the same mistakes in future negotiations.
Stuck in a rut.
Pretty much. So for you, our listener, the entrepreneur striving for negotiation mastery, how can you effectively harness the power of information-based bargaining in your own entrepreneurial journey? That's the takeaway. The core principle is really to shift your mindset. Approach every single negotiation, big or small, as an ongoing opportunity to actively gather valuable information. Prepare meticulously beforehand. Do that homework. Listen actively and observe carefully during every interaction, words, tone, body language, everything. And crucially, maintain a constant willingness to adapt your strategy based on the new insights you gain throughout the process. And perhaps most importantly, take the time afterward to critically analyze your negotiation experiences. What went well, what could have gone better, identify areas for improvement, and continuously refine your skills and your overall approach. It's a journey, not a destination.
This has been an incredibly comprehensive and really insightful deep dive into the art and maybe the science of negotiation. And we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today.
We certainly have. These 7 key negotiation advantages, drawn from that core idea of information-based bargaining, really do provide a robust and I think very actionable framework for anyone looking to boost their negotiation effectiveness.
So just as a quick recap for you, our listener, we've thoroughly explored. First, understanding and leveraging your authentic bargaining style. Second, the critical importance of setting clear goals and expectations up front. Third, the often underestimated power of building and nurturing strong relationships. Fourth, strategically identifying and utilizing your negotiation leverage. Fifth, the value of navigating with those authoritative standards and norms. Sixth, the profound impact of deeply understanding the other party's interests, not just their positions. And finally, seventh, embracing that overarching continuous process of information-based bargaining plan. Listen, adapt. These aren't just abstract concepts. They are, as you said, strategic capabilities that can have a really significant positive impact on your entrepreneurial success.
Absolutely. And remember, these insights are specifically tailored for you, the entrepreneur, the learner, who's out there navigating the dynamic, often challenging world of business deals and partnerships every day.
So here's a final thought to mull over. Consider how consistently applying even just 1 or 2 of these core principles could fundamentally shift the outcomes of your negotiations going forward. What potential blind spots maybe have we illuminated for you today? And maybe more importantly, how will you consciously approach your next negotiation differently, armed with this new knowledge?
Those are definitely crucial questions for any entrepreneur, any negotiator to ponder. Food for thought.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We sincerely hope these insights empower you to negotiate with greater confidence, maybe a bit more strategically, and ultimately achieve even greater success in all your entrepreneurial endeavors.
Until our next exploration.
And if you do find yourself reflecting on these strategies, maybe have some follow-up questions, or just want to delve deeper into any of these specific areas, feel free to reach out. Thanks for listening. Want to close more deals, maybe achieve a bit more entrepreneurial success? What if I told you there were like 7 key advantages you could leverage in pretty much every negotiation, almost like a secret playbook?
A playbook, I like that.
Welcome to the deep dive. We take the essential knowledge from key sources and for advantage, and we boil it down so you, our listener, can get the crucial info fast.
Right. And our mission today.
Our mission today is to pull out 7 core negotiation advantages you can start using, well, maybe even today. Think of it as, going from maybe feeling a bit uncertain to being a pretty savvy negotiator all in one go.
Exactly. We're not just summarizing here, we're synthesizing.
Yeah.
We've taken those core ideas of what's called information-based bargaining, basically. The idea that planning, listening, and adapting are your absolute best tools. And we've translated them into, well, actionable advantages for your entrepreneurial journey.
Okay, so buckle up. Over our time together, we're going to explore these 7 specific areas that can give you a real edge. First, unlocking your authentic bargaining style. Second, setting the stage with clear goals and expectations. Third, the power of building and leveraging relationships. That's a big one.
Crucial.
Fourth, identifying and utilizing your negotiation leverage. Fifth, navigating with authoritative standards and norms. Sixth, deeply understanding the other party's interests, getting inside their head, maybe.
Well, understanding their why.
Right. And seventh, harnessing the process of information-based bargaining itself. I'm genuinely excited to unpack these and hear how you listening can start putting them to work. So let's